Back when I worked at WDSS, I looked after the audiovisual needs of the school for many years, just because it was an area of interest of mine. It was something that I had some expertise in. Anyway, one year I managed to convince the principal at the time that we needed a video camera to help document some of the things that went on around the school, because WDSS is notorious for not looking after its history and documenting it, and that's a story for another day. Anyway, I managed to convince him, and he gave me the money to go buy a camera, and we bought a couple little machines to do some crude titling and so on back in the day. And I managed to actually use it at the school on occasion. I did document my kids growing up, but that's another story. But anyway, one of the things I never ever did was I never asked for money to buy a film for the camera. I bought it all myself. And I now have about 200 hours, over 200 hours of footage that I've managed to accumulate on that particular camera through the years. And one day last week, I pulled out my logbook. I found the logbook in a drawer, and I used to write down everything that I was filming. And I saw some things that I thought maybe some of the people who either taught there, went there as students, or even the general public might be interested in seeing. So I thought this story that I'm going to do today might be of interest to some people, that to see how the beautiful wood floor went into our gymnasium. It's got a really neat story. So I called and got a little bit of information to augment what I remembered and what I filmed. So this is what happened. Don Martin was the curriculum leader, or department head as we used to say in the old days, and in my opinion the most influential teacher in the history of WDSS. But he had a problem on his hands. As big as WDSS was, it was sort of, let's say, the poor kid on the block, and was unable to host double or AAA basketball or volleyball tournaments because other teams not only didn't want to play in a tile floor, it was downright dangerous. Some might remember the panels attached to the steel trusses high up in the gym. I was there when those were installed, and those were intended to be sound-absorbing panels in an attempt to provide the gym with better acoustic properties because of such a terrible echo in there. The reality, however, was that those panels were just incredible dust collectors. And as I like to describe them, they were like lobster traps. Seemingly every ball or shuttlecock that made it up that high never came down. A couple of times of the year we'd have to bring in a lift just to get everything down to restock the equipment room. Anyway, with all the air currents in the gym as the athletes started moving around, the dust continually made its way to the floor, making an already slippery surface even slipperier, not to mention dangerous for players that were trying to stop, accelerate, or pivot. So Don did what Don always did, and that was set out to do something about it. And that was to have a top shelf wood floor installed that would benefit not only basketball and volleyball, but all sports and gym activities for many years to come. He started out by approaching the principal at the time, seeking both approval for his idea and funding. But knowing that a new wood floor would cost several $100,000, he didn't have to prepare himself too hard for the answers he would get. The idea itself was well received, but money of that magnitude wasn't about to come from a principal's budget, and anything coming from the board level would probably take years to get approved. So at least, armed with an approval for his idea, Don set out to fundraise for the project. The timing, however, couldn't have been worse, because Wallaceburg was in such a bad way. That was when the economy took a terrible turn, and industry after industry closed shop in Wallaceburg, leaving thousands out of work, literally thousands. This was not the time to be asking people or businesses for donations. Anyway, around this time, Don heard a story about something called the Toronto Raptors Foundation, and how they had donated $10,000 to a school to help them with funds for a new floor. Well, that was, if you know Don, that was like showing a bone to a dog. And Don dug around until he found an email address and an application form requesting funding from the Raptors Foundation. Anyway, the application also required a written submission outlining the rationale for the request, which Don painstakingly put together. And if you know how Don speaks or writes, you know it would be well done. After putting significant time into this and submitting the application, quite a bit of time passed without receiving a response from the Raptors Foundation. It was getting a little bit depressing until one day the phone rang. A fine lady on the other end of the phone explained to Don that the foundation was unfortunately not able to grant WDSS the same $10,000 the other school was awarded. However, The foundation did offer one complete floor installation each year in Canada, and the WDSS had been selected based on need and demographics. This was of course beyond a dream come true, but as I knew and I experienced, the board has a policy whereby schools cannot accept donations unless they have board approval. Well, the board actually turned down the offer because the one proviso of the donation was that two large logos, one of the Toronto Raptors and the others of Nike, who were actually providing the funds, had to be painted on the new floor. Well, after some negotiations, the board and the foundation came to an agreement when the foundation agreed to allow a reduction in the logo sizes. Finally approved, this to set the wheels in motion for the installation. In mid-January of 2001, I remember a large transport rolling up outside the Lawrence Street entrance one evening, and the busy crew started unloading all of the materials and supplies needed for the installation. I made an attempt to document the transformation of the gym as the work progressed, so let's watch what happened. The video is now almost 20 years old, unfortunately, so the color quality, resolution aren't particularly stellar, and it's in the old 4:3 aspect ratio, but you'll get the idea. Let's take a look. Now here we can see the supplies arriving in the early evening one night in mid-January. You know how it's not particularly late, but you know it gets dark fairly early this time of year. And there was quite a crew of people that came with the shipping company, as well as the people from the installation folks. Now I don't think that we had any students helping with that, but I could be corrected on that, but I don't think so. Anyway, let's just, you can see the sheets of half-inch plywood coming off one at a time, because they didn't have a lift truck or a forklift to lift it all off in stacks. And so you can see all the, there's three main parts to this floor, which we'll get to as we watch it. You can see the date there, January 15th. The first step is removing all of the rubber baseboards, which they had to go around and do. Now the first step after that is laying a sheet of vapor barrier. You see the plastic on one half of the gym, right directly over the tile floor. The problem is that this whole process was very labor intensive, because they would have to finish one half of the floor, then move all the remaining supplies over to the other half that was already somewhat finished, so that they could complete the second half. So all of this stuff had to be moved more than once. Here we can see the sheets of plywood being laid down. You can see there's one layer and a second layer on an angle over top of that. Now there's an interesting component to this. You see these strips that are on the floor. Now remember I had said that Nike was actually the company providing the funds to pay for this. Well, that was those strips are material that came from the insoles of running shoes, leftover material from Nike shoes, and it was all ground and glued together. And the installer told me they referred to it as Nike grind. So that's kind of interesting. And they put these strips, and the whole floor floats on basically the insoles of Nike shoes. And you can see we're just about halfway down across the floor here. They had used, of course, pneumatic nailers to nail this. You have no idea. I don't know if they used a million nails putting these together. They just randomly nailed these. There's just countless nails being put in, joining these two layers of half-inch plywood together. Now they didn't actually put the tongue and groove together. You can see little cracks in between, especially on the second layer there. They didn't have to be super tight to one another. And you can see the date here as we go along. This is a couple days after they started. Now they're into the second half of the gym, over on the east side. And they've got the plastic down. You can see the Nike grind and the first layer of plywood. And you can see they're starting to get ready to install the hardwood on top of the basically the floating plywood layer. Getting close to finishing the plywood installation. Now here they're getting started with the first row, getting ready to start the first row of hardwood, and they put they run a line from one end to the other. You can only imagine how far you could be out if you don't get that first row absolutely perfect. You can see the string here from the vantage point, and this row they just temporarily put in place before they actually put the first row of hardwood in. The hardwood was really interesting material, and there was a lot in it was painstaking watching them put this in. Notice all the different colors in the floor, and I'm going to guess that this is not the same floor that they would put in for example, as an NBA team. In fact, the installer told me that this was all second and third grade material, the wood. Not there's an example of it right there. It's all been graded. Had nothing to do with how hard the wood or if the wood was good. I believe it was just all to do with color. So there's a lot more variance in the color of the strips of wood in the floor here. All tongue and groove, using rubber mounts. Everything had to be absolutely square and in place before they went through with the pneumatic nailers, and boy, they went through quickly. This is a really unique aspect of the floor, and I talked to the installer, and he said that the engineer decided to put in expansion cracks. I'm going to guess probably every 2 feet. I didn't have a chance to measure it, but I remember that, and he said that this was the first floor they'd ever installed like this, because they never installed one this far south in Ontario. And they recognize that we have really high humidity summers, and he was really concerned about expansion of the floor in the summer. So they put these expansion cracks up, but roughly every 2 feet. And I still recall they sent a fellow down to Home Hardware here in Wellsburg and bought a piece of lamp cord that stretched the length of the gym. And you know the lamp cord that's got 2 strands to it, and they ripped it in 2, so they just had 1 strand of it. And they would use that as a spacer every 2 feet to stick in there to allow for the expansion. And then once they got down to the far end, they got it all finished, they just reach down and pull and peel the cord out. Now we're looking here, this is looking pretty nice now. And you know, they pick a piece of flooring, and a lot of times they'll toss them aside because the length isn't correct. You know, it's too close to the joint of the previous row or whatever, or the color wasn't good enough, or the color was inappropriate. So it's quite interesting to watch them do this, and they did it rather quickly. Now you can see we're getting close to being finished over on the east side of the gym, and I wanted to be there when they put the last piece in. So I was very it was important to me to be there to film this last little bit. You have to know there's nothing probably more satisfying than putting the last piece into a puzzle that you spent a long time putting together, and that's what this was. And notice it doesn't go all the way over to the floor, because again it has to expand lengthwise as well as longitudinally. I mean across the gym as well. So they had the expansion cracks to counter for that, and plus they kept it away from the walls. So this whole floor literally floats on top of Nike grind. Here you can see, now once it's in, there was a big process of sanding. And they had multiple people working with these sanders, and it was a mess. It was a terribly, terribly messy job, and the sawdust was just incredible. And I can't believe these guys aren't wearing face masks. Anyway, after it's all been sanded, this crew came in one weekend to put on the logos and all of the lines on the floor, and I could not believe how quickly that went down. It's a company that specializes in lining gym floors, and you can see that's actually painted, and I was just astounded how quickly this all went down, including the big logos on the floor as well. Now, after they couldn't put they didn't put the finished coat of sealer on top of the wood until all this is done, the lines and the logo and so on. These guys worked just amazingly. I was there quite a bit while they did this, and all done in one weekend. Not long after the floor was completed, the Raptors Foundation held a grand opening in the form of a school assembly. The Raptors sent their mascot along, who put on an impressive display of spectacular dunks, but for some reason I either didn't videotape this or I've lost the footage. Without this most important facility upgrade, WDSS would never have been able to attract Janine Day, a widely known high-performance basketball coach and mentor for both students and other coaches. The floor has also given Basketball Walsburg a first-class facility for their teams. While the floor serves many sports well, basketball in particular has taken off to a level never before seen in Walsburg, with the payoff being several provincial championships by both WDSS and Basketball Walsburg teams. For athletics, there isn't anything better than a hardwood floor. Aside from the warm aesthetics, the surface provides better grip than a waxed tile floor, and is much more forgiving than the tile glued onto concrete. Don't forget that the whole floor, including the hardwood surface and the dual-layered softwood core, floats on foam strips, making it so much better for knees, ankles, and even falls. The floor, it's hard to believe, is now 20 years old, and our whole community owes a debt of gratitude to Don Martin for his foresight and diligent efforts in this huge facility upgrade.